Unanimous consent that the substitute amendment, which is at the desk, and the text of the Senate committee reported bill be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered as original text for the purpose of further amendment, and that no points of order be considered waived by this agreement.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I also take this opportunity to ask a unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-Con Res 49, the adjournment resolution.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 49, providing for a conditional adjournment or recess of the Senate.
That the reading be suspended.
Without objection.
Is the resolution agreed to? I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to. The motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, today is a really great day. We bring to the United States Senate floor the Commerce, Justice, Science Bill. In a short time, I will be joined by my colleague, the distinguished senior senator from Alabama, who is my ranking member, and he too will be making his opening statement. I want to thank Senators Reid and McConnell for agreeing to bring this bill up, and to Chairman Byrd and Ranking Member Cochran for a rather robust 302B allocation to let this bill go forward. Mr. President, first let me just say to my colleagues in the Senate as they watch this debate that this bill is a bipartisan bill. The senator from Alabama, Senator Shelby, and I worked hand in hand to craft a bill that is in the best interest of the United States of America, not trying to score partisan political points. And that's what we've done. The Commerce, Justice, Science Bill promotes a stronger economy, promotes a safer country, and also promotes how to make us competitive in the world. The CJS bill totals $54 billion in discretionary budget authority. Did we spend more than the president asked for? You bet we did, and we're proud that our bill is $3.2 billion above the president's request, because we put the money primarily into security. We spent the money in this bill on security, keeping 300 million Americans safe from terrorism and also fighting violent crime. We also promoted innovation and competitiveness by investing in scientific research and technology and the scientific education of our people. But we were also strong stewards of the taxpayers' money and have promoted accountability. Fiscal accountability and stewardship of taxpayers' dollars. We, working on a bipartisan basis, stood sentry against waste, fraud, and abuse, and we've put our language also in the checkbook. The subcommittee's first priority is to protect the American people, from terrorism, a war without borders, a war without front, but also to protect them here at home against violent crime, against murder, mayhem, sexual predators stalking our children, violence against women, looking out for our children and making sure that there are enough cops on the beat. The Justice Department is almost 50% of the CJS bill. Funding for the justice component totals over $25 billion. But remember what we do. We fund the federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI, DEA, the Bureau of Alcohol and Firearms, as well as our Marshal Service. Our major law enforcement count on us. But who else also counts on us? State and local cops on the beat. And we have put the money into the federal checkbook to say, as you go after the bad guys, we are absolutely on your side. Let's start with our primary responsibility as a federal government. That's funding the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is our premier domestic law enforcement agency. It has a dual mission, Mr. President. One is fighting violent crime in our communities, and it is well known, well established, and well respected. But after that terrible attack on the United States of America, we had to decide how we were going to have a domestic agency that also focuses on terrorism. We didn't create a new federal agency to do that because we didn't want a new bureaucracy. We wanted a new and fresh effort against terrorism. So we gave it to the FBI and their National Security Division within it. It is, if you read all the British spy novels and so on, the FBI does that component where in England would have been associated with MI5. This bill provides $6.6 billion for the FBI. $6.6 billion for the FBI. $150 million more than the president's budget. This includes almost $4 billion for their counter-terrorism effort. Our bill will also put, to make sure we are fighting terrorism, 230 new counterterrorism agents out there and giving them new tools to collect and new tools to do this, to protect Americans at home. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're fighting violent crime. We've been very concerned about some of the budget games going on at Justice in OMB, where they keep moving agents around they move agents out of their job of fighting crime to fight terrorism. So those numbers look good. Then they eliminate those jobs, those vacancies, and there we are. We need our FBI doing both. Violent crime in America has increased 2%. Homicides are up 2%. Robberies are up 7%. Nearly every region of the country has been affected, from very large cities to small communities. We've heard from our colleagues that the FBI needs more agents and more help fighting violent crime in their communities. The CJS bill rejects the president's cut. We provide funding to retain 100 FBI agents that the president eliminated. Eliminating FBI agents when we're fighting crime and fighting terrorism, don't think that's a good idea. Don't think that's a good idea at all. Bipartisan basis, we rejected that foolhardy recommendation. So we'll be there for the FBI. But they're not the only ones fighting terrorism and fighting crime in our streets. The other is the DEA agency. It is an international agency as well as an all-American agency. It's in over 60 countries, and yet at the same time has very strong border and local responsibilities. Fighting a $330 billion international drug trade, they need help. Drugs finance almost 2/3 of the terrorist activity. It comes out of Afghanistan. It's money that goes, the poppy fields of Afghanistan, with one of the biggest crops that they've ever had, goes to funding the Taliban and funding terrorist activity. DEA is right now in Afghanistan fighting narco-terrorism, working hand in hand with the Karzai government, working hand in hand with our military to disrupt that poppy trade. But right now they're also in our streets and our neighborhoods, working with our local police chiefs, working with our local sheriffs, working with our local FBI, fighting the scourge of illegal drugs, from heroin to meth, from destroying our neighborhoods. We were horrified during the committee hearing to learn the DEA has a hiring freeze on drug enforcement agents. Oh my gosh. Foolhardy. This is outrageous. So again, working on a bipartisan basis, we added a modest $50 million to DEA to lift the hiring freeze, and they can now hire up 200 new agents to fight drugs at home, drugs in schools, and drugs overseas. We've also funded the Bureau of Alcohol and Firearms Explosive Agency, which It does everything from investigating arson to stopping illegal firearms trafficking. They're also working hand in hand with our military to come up with ways to deal with these terrible improvised explosive devices. We also provide robust support for our marshal services, where we ask them to track down everyone from dangerous fugitives to sexual predators. They protect our federal judges, they provide security at terrorist trials, and they're doing a good job, and we need to support them. But where we've done our most significant effort, we've also done another significant effort, though, when it comes to state and local law enforcement. The CJS bill, I think I use G because I keep thinking of G-men. The CJS bill is the most important source of federal funding for that thin blue line of local law enforcement that's out there every day working tirelessly to keep our families, our schools, and our neighborhoods safe. Our cops on the beat are working harder than ever to fight this rising tide of violent crime. Our local and state police are often the first to identify even suspected terrorist activities, but their budgets are under increased stress. So we were deeply, deeply troubled when the president came in with draconian cuts to cut state and local police. What did they do? Well, first of all, in that famous Cops on the Beat program that helped local law enforcement have more officers, they reduced the funding to a skimpy, Spartan $32 million. $32 million for the whole country to put cops on the beat. One state alone could use that. And at the same time, they eliminated the burn grants. The burn grants are those federal funds named after Edwin Byrne, a police officer from New York killed in the line of duty, and this program was to help local law enforcement have the tools, the technology they need to protect themselves so they could protect us. Hey, so that was eliminated. We are spending a fortune on so many other things called the war in Iraq, and yet we eliminated the burn grants. So this committee stepped up to it, and we've added $1.5 billion for grants for the state and local police. These funds will fight crime, gangs, meth, violence in the schools, and we think it's terrific. Our bill will provide $660 million for the burn grant formula. It will pay for improved technology that they need, improved training, police and prosecutors. We also added $550 million to the community policing efforts, which is a competitive grant program that enables them to bring more police into their department, paying their salaries and their overtime. We stand with the front line. We stand with the thin blue line. But we're also protecting ourselves against other threats. We do not want to have a declining economy or a declining ability to compete in the world. So our committee fostered innovation and competitiveness. We added so when we look at those things in our legislation, we added more money. We implemented the recently enacted bipartisan bill, the Competes bill. We added $1 billion in our science and commerce part of this bill, adding $6.5 billion for the National Science Foundation. We provided $860 million for the National Standards of Technology. We provide close to $2 billion to the Patent and Trade Office to make sure they're fully functioning and deal with the backlogs. We fund our trade rep, and we fund the International Trade Representative. We also have two premier science agencies, one NOAA, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration. We provide $4.2 billion for that, $400 million above the president's request, $795 million to implement the bipartisan recommendations on the Joint Oceans Commission. We also provided money to look into federal climate change. This is not new for this committee. The NSF, NOAA, and NASA provide 85% of all of the federal research looking at climate change. As we work on policy, as we try to find sensible solutions that are affordable to our country, they're going to turn to science, and in turning to science, we need to make sure we have funded them. Last but not at all least, a very important agency, NASA. Mr. President, today is the 50th anniversary of Sputnik. 50 years ago, the Russians launched into space a 180-pound satellite that shook the cosmos. It shook the cosmos. And it said the Russians were the first in space. Well, we knew that we couldn't gut that lie. President Eisenhower answered that call. Robust efforts in science, particularly the National Science Foundation. A few years later, 3 years later, a dynamic president named Jack Kennedy put out a national goal that we were going to go to the moon, be there first, and return our astronauts safely. Well, 50 years later, we honor that legacy by providing $17.5 billion for NASA, $150 million above the president's request to keep our commitment to a balanced space program, the space shuttle, the space station, the next generation space vehicle. We make significant efforts in science and aeronautics, and I will talk more about that later when I will offer an amendment with my colleague, Senator Shelby, Hutchinson, Landrieu, and Nelson, on also how to help NASA continue to meet its responsibility. In conclusion, Mr. President, let me say, though, this committee has been strongly committed to reform, strongly committed to accountability, oversight, and fiscal stewardship. So through its oversight, we uncovered cost overruns, the NOAA satellite program, $4 billion over budget, the NSF research equipment program, $25 million over budget, dramatic backlogs at the patent office, backlogs at the EEOC. We said we were not going to allow that. We also found that some of our funds, were going into things like lavish conferences, lobster rolls, and limousines. Well, you're going to have an amendment later on that's just going to take that right out. When we give money to these agencies to do the kind of training we want them to do, it's not to sit around, sipping Chardonnay, eating lobster rolls, and so on. So if you'll pardon the expression, Mr. President, we told them to take a cab. So our bill really continues to do that. I hope that the President doesn't veto our bill, and we'll talk about that more in conclusion. So again, this bill is a bipartisan bill. I presented it to the Senate, and now I would just really compliment my ranking member, Senator Shelby, and his staff. Our staffs has really worked together. I wish the taxpayers could see it. They'd really be proud of us. They'd be proud of our working relationship, and that's why we produced a bill that works for America. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President?
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I will not replicate what Senator MIKULSKI went through. She's done a very, I think, thorough explanation of the bill. This is a very complex bill. It funds commerce, justice, science, and NASA, for example, related agencies, and I'll touch on things. First of all, I want to say something about I chaired this committee before, and Senator MIKULSKI was the ranking Democrat on the committee. Now she chairs it, and I'm the ranking Democrat.